Late one night, as Maxwell lay in his small, dimly lit room in Lagos, he felt it again, the presence. It wasn't just a vague feeling anymore. No! Tonight it was stronger, darker. Something was there, watching him. He shook it off, grabbed his phone, and slid under the covers. This is the last time, he whispered to himself, the same promise he'd made 100 times before. But this time, something was different. At first, it had been nothing more than curiosity. Ade stumbled across the videos one late night after scrolling aimlessly on his phone. He didn't think much of it. It was just a distraction, something to pass the time. But what started as an innocent exploration quickly became a secret he couldn't escape. It began slowly, once a week, maybe twice. But then the urge grew, stronger and louder, like a drumbeat in his mind. Soon, every free moment was haunted by the pull, the itch he couldn't scratch in public. His nights were no longer his own. Every evening, he locked his door, closed the curtains, and dimmed the lights. With his phone in hand, he sank into the videos, fapping, his breathing quickening, his heartbeat racing. It felt like a rush at first, an electrifying escape. But after each session, the silence was deafening. The shame would crash over him like a tidal wave, drowning him in guilt. He would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, his chest tight, his thoughts screaming. What's wrong with me? Why can't I stop? He promised himself every time. This is the last time. I swear. But as soon as the sun set, the whispers in his mind returned, luring him back. It didn't take long before the habit took control of his life. Maxwell started craving the rush in the middle of the day. He would sit at work, distracted, his hands shaking as he fought the urge to reach for his phone. His thoughts became consumed by the images, the sensations, the escape. He stopped meeting his friends, canceled dates, and avoided family gatherings. He didn't want anyone to see the emptiness in his eyes. The exhaustion etched into his face. But the worst was at night. Some nights, he would watch for hours, one video after another, chasing a feeling that never lasted. His body felt trapped in a loop, his hands moving automatically, his mind begging him to stop even as his body bet-ed him. Other nights, he would finish, only to feel the gnawing urge to start fapping again minutes later. It was never enough. He would go again and again until his body ached, his head throbbed, and his soul felt hollow. The more Maxwell indulged, the darker his world became. His energy vanished. He stopped exercising, stopped eating properly, stopped living. His dreams became twisted, filled with distorted images of the videos he watched. He woke up drenched in sweat, his heart racing, his hands trembling. He couldn't tell where the dreams ended and reality began. He stopped looking at himself in the mirror. He hated the man he saw, the dark circles under his eyes, the weight he had gained, the hollow look that stared back at him. But the habit was stronger than his disgust. It was a monster inside him, whispering constantly, "One more time, just once. No one will know." Some nights, Maxwell cried after finishing, the shame cutting deeper than any knife. "What is wrong with me?" he would whisper into the darkness. But the answer never came, and yet, despite the pain, despite the shame, he couldn't stop. The monster had its claws in him, and every time he gave in, it grew stronger. The day Maxwell realized he was no longer in control was the day he tried to quit. He had deleted the videos, sworn to himself that he wouldn't watch anymore. But the very next night, as he lay in bed, the whispers began. The pull was unbearable, a physical ache that made his chest tighten and his head pound. He tossed and turned, clenching his fists, gritting his teeth. But the monster was relentless. His hands moved on their own, reaching for his phone. His mind screamed at him to stop, but his body didn't listen. He hated himself even as he watched, tears streaming down his face. It wasn't pleasure anymore. It was punishment. When he finished, he curled into a ball, shaking, his chest heaving with silent sobs. He felt like he was disappearing, piece by piece, every night. And in the silence of his room, he whispered to himself, "I'm not a man anymore. I'm a slave." This was Maxwell's life, a cycle of indulgence, shame, and despair. He thought no one knew his secret, but he was wrong. Something had been watching him all along, something that thrived on his weakness. waiting for the moment he would lose himself completely. That night, as Maxwell leaned back, his phone glowing in the dark, something felt off. The air in the room grew cold and a strange tension filled the space. He ignored it and pressed play, letting the familiar images take over. But as his fingers moved, he heard it, a faint whisper. Maxwell! He froze, his body stiff. The whisper was soft, almost gentle, but it made his skin crawl. He looked around the room, his chest tightening. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice shaking. The room was silent. He laughed nervously and turned back to his phone. "Just my mind playing tricks." But as soon as he resumed, the whisper came again, louder this time. "Maxwell, I see you." The next night, Maxwell told himself it wouldn't happen again. He turned off the lights, slid under his blanket, and reached for his phone. But as soon as he began, the whisper returned, accompanied by a low, guttural laugh. "Do you really think I won't come back?" Maxwell dropped his phone, his heart racing. The shadows in the corner of his room seemed darker, thicker, as if they were alive. He tried to ignore them, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. He picked up his phone again, hoping to distract himself, but the moment he pressed play, the air grew colder and the voice returned, louder than ever. "Maxwell, every time you touch yourself, you feed me, and I'm hungry." On the fourth night, Maxwell couldn't resist. The urge was too strong, like an itch deep in his soul that he couldn't scratch. He locked his door, dimmed the lights, and began again, desperate for the temporary escape. But this time, the voice didn't just whisper. The shadows in his room began to move, swirling and twisting. The darkness pooled in the corner, and from it emerged a figure, a tall, faceless form with glowing red eyes. "I am the Shadow Voyager," it said, its voice echoing like a drumbeat in Maxwell's chest. "The spirit of lust and shame. Every time you touch, I grow stronger. Every time you watch, you give me power. And now, you are mine." Maxwell froze, his hands trembling, his heart pounding. No, this isn't real." The spirit laughed, a sound that seemed to shake the room. "Oh, it's very real, Maxwell. And soon, I'll take everything from you." Over the next few nights, Maxwell couldn't stop. The spirit taunted him every time, but the urge was too strong. He would sit in the dark, trembling, knowing what was coming, but unable to resist. Each time he gave in, the spirit grew larger, its form more solid. Its laughter filled the room, and its eyes burned into his soul. "You're weak, Maxwell," it sneered. "You can't fight me. You don't want to fight me." And Maxwell believed it. He felt powerless, trapped in a cycle he couldn't escape. But the more he indulged, the worse things became. The spirit began to follow him, its shadow appearing in mirrors, its whispers echoing in his ears even in broad daylight. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. His once bright eyes grew hollow, and his energy drained away. One night, at the edge of despair, Maxwell remembered a story his grandmother had told him, a story of spirits and curses, and how some could be broken. He sought out an elder in his neighborhood, a man named Baba Cola, who was said to know the ways of the unseen. When Maxwell told him everything, Baba Cola's face grew grave. "You have fed the Shadow Voyager for too long," he said. "It is bound to you now. To break free, you must starve it. But it will fight you. It will show you things that will break your mind. You must endure, or it will consume you." Baba Cola gave Maxwell a charm and a set of instructions. "For 7 nights, you must not give in. Not once. If you do, the spirit will take your soul." The first night, Maxwell poured salt around his bed as instructed and held the charm tightly. The spirit appeared, angrier than ever. "You think you can resist me?" it roared, its voice shaking the walls. It showed him visions of the videos, his greatest temptations, his deepest desires. His body ached with the need to give in, but he clutched the charm and whispered prayers until dawn. The second night was worse. The spirit mocked him, taunted him, showing him his failures and insecurities. "You're nothing without me," it hissed. "You'll come crawling back." By the 5th night, Maxwell was exhausted. The spirit's attacks grew more violent. its whispers turning into screams. But he held on, clinging to the hope of freedom. On the seventh night, as dawn approached, the spirit appeared one last time, its form massive and terrifying. "You've won nothing, Maxwell," it growled. "You'll never escape me." But as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the window, the spirit let out a scream and dissolved into smoke. Maxwell fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He had won. The room was silent, the air light for the first time in weeks. He threw away his phone and everything tied to his addiction. He would never go back, and though he was free, he never forgot the spirit's final words. "I'll be waiting